The war didn't start with a bang. It didn't start with a shout or a siren or a lawyer's cease and desist letter printed on heavy cardstock. It started with a neon pink sticky note. It was stuck to the center of my front door at 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know it was 6:14 a.m. because I hadn't even had my coffee yet. I was standing on my welcome mat in my bathrobe, clutching the Wall Street Journal like a shield, blinking against the morning sun. I peeled the note off the wood. The handwriting was aggressive, pointy loops, heavy pressure, the kind of penmanship that suggests the writer was stabbing the paper rather than gliding across it. It read, "Dave, your porch light is aggressive. It assaults my living room ambiance and violates the tranquility of the neighborhood. Please address this immediately, or I will be forced to escalate. B." I stared at the note. Then I looked up at my porch light. It was off, obviously, because the sun was up, but I knew exactly what bulb was in there. It was a standard, generic, 60-watt equivalent soft white LED. It was the kind of light bulb you buy in a 12-pack at Costco for $12. It was the Toyota Camry of light bulbs. It didn't have an agenda. It didn't have a personality. And it certainly didn't have the capacity for aggression. "Aggressive," I muttered, flipping the note over as if looking for a footnote citing the Geneva Convention. "It assaults her ambiance?" I looked to my left. Separating my property from the next lot was a 6-foot cedar fence, but due to the slope of the neighborhood, the house next door sat slightly higher. This was the domain of Brenda. Brenda was the kind of neighbor who mowed her lawn diagonally because she read in a magazine that it stimulated root growth. She was the kind of person who put out seasonal flags for holidays that didn't exist. She was the unofficial, self-appointed compliance officer of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association, a woman who treated the CCNR's covenants, conditions, and restrictions like holy scripture. Her house was painted a shade of gray so dark it absorbed hope. Her windows were currently shut tight. I crumpled the sticky note, shoved it into the pocket of my robe, and went inside to make coffee. I tried to tell myself to let it go. I told myself that Brenda was just having a bad week. Maybe her hydrangeas were wilting. Maybe the store was out of organic kale. But by the time the coffee maker gurgled its final death rattle, the irritation had set in. It was the word assaults that did it. You can't accuse a man's home hardware of assault without evidence. I took my mug, walked back to the front door, and stepped out onto the porch. There she was. Brenda was in her driveway, wearing a wide-brimmed gardening hat that looked like a satellite dish and floral gardening gloves. She was deadheading her petunias with the precision of a bomb disposal technician. "Morning, Brenda," I called out. My voice was calm, reasonable. I was the picture of suburban stability. Brenda froze. She didn't turn immediately. She snipped one last dead flower, placed it gently in her compost bag, and then pivoted slowly. She adjusted her glasses. "David?" she said. She never called me Dave. It was always David, like I was in trouble with the principal. "I see you got my correspondence." "I got the sticky note, yes," I said, walking to the edge of my porch. I leaned against the railing. I was a little confused by the terminology, though. "You said my light was aggressive?" "It pierces," Brenda said, making a stabbing motion with her pruning shears. "It pierces the sanctity of my evening reading hour. Last night I was attempting to enjoy a chamomile tea and the latest Oprah's book club selection, and I felt like I was being interrogated by the KGB. I blinked. "Brenda, it's a 60-watt soft white. It's barely bright enough to find my keys. It's not the wattage, David. It's the throw, she said, using the term with surprising confidence. The light pollution spills over the property line. It enters my bay window. It creates a glare on my television screen. It is visual trespassing. You have curtains, I pointed out. Heavy ones. I've seen them. They look like theater velvet. I shouldn't have to live in a cave, she snapped, stepping closer to the fence. I have a right to natural darkness. It disrupts my circadian rhythms. Do you know what blue light exposure does to cortisol levels after 8 p.m? It's a health hazard. I took a sip of my coffee. It was too hot, but I didn't wince. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Okay, I said slowly. Let me get this straight. You want me to turn off my porch light, the light that prevents me from tripping over the Amazon packages the delivery guy throws at my door from a moving vehicle. You want me to sit in the dark because my 60-watt bulb is raising your cortisol. I want you to be a considerate neighbor, Brenda said, crossing her arms. The HOA bylaws clearly state that exterior lighting must not be a nuisance to adjacent properties. Article 4, Section C. There it was. The nuclear option. The bylaws. I felt a twitch in my left eye. I pride myself on being a good neighbor. I return borrowed tools. I don't mow before 9 a.m. on weekends. I wave at the mailman. But there is something about being cited article and section before I've finished my breakfast that triggers a primal defense mechanism in the male brain. I know the bylaws, Brenda, I lied. I had skimmed them once, 5 years ago, mostly to see if I could build a pizza oven. Answer, no. And I'm pretty sure nuisance is subjective. Safety, however, is not. Brenda smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that just spotted a seal with a cramp. Safety, she scoffed. We live in a gated community, David. The most dangerous thing that happens here is when the pool boy puts too much chlorine in this jacuzzi. You don't need a searchlight to walk 10 feet from your driveway to your door. It's a deterrence, I insisted. It's a nuisance, she countered. Fix it, or I'll file a formal grievance with the Architectural Committee. Janet is the chair this year, and you know how she feels about light pollution. Janet. Great. Janet once tried to ban wind chimes because the frequency disturbed her poodle's anxiety medication. Is that a threat, Brenda? It's a promise, she said, turning back to her petunias. Change the bulb, David. Get something dimmer, or just learn to use a flashlight like a normal person. She snipped a flower head with a decisive snick. The conversation was over. I walked back inside and closed the door. I stood in the hallway, the silence of the house wrapping around me. My dog, Buster, a golden retriever with the IQ of a ham sandwich, trotted up and licked my shin. She thinks the light is too bright, Buster, I told him. Buster wagged his tail, happy to be included. She thinks a soft white, warm glow, cozy little welcoming bulb is aggressive. I walked into the kitchen and set my mug down. My blood was humming. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was determination. It was the feeling of a man who has been challenged to a duel. But instead of pistols, the weapons were technical specifications and passive-aggressive compliance. She wanted me to change the bulb? Fine. I would change the bulb. But Brenda had made a critical tactical error. She had invoked the concept of safety, and in the United States of America, you can justify almost anything if you claim it's for security purposes. I walked to the junk drawer, the holy grail of suburban manhood. I dug past the dried-out superglue, the batteries of questionable charge, and the twist ties, until I found what I was looking for. It was a spare bulb I had bought by mistake a year ago. I had ordered it online, thinking it was a standard replacement. When it arrived, I realized I had misread the description. It wasn't a soft white, 2700 Kelvin. It wasn't even a cool white, 4000 Kelvin. It was a daylight security emitter, 5000 Kelvin, 1600 lumens. For those who don't speak electrician, 2700 K is the color of a sunset. It's romantic. It makes you look tan. 5000 K is the color of a hospital operating room. It is the color of a cloudy noon in the Arctic. It is the color of truth. It doesn't just illuminate, it interrogates. I held the bulb up. It looked innocent enough, encased in white plastic, but I knew the power contained within. This wasn't a light bulb. It was a mood killer. She wants different, I whispered to the empty kitchen. She wants safety. I went to the garage and grabbed the stepladder. Replacing the bulb took 30 seconds. The glass housing of my porch fixture was frosted, which usually diffused the light nicely. But as I screwed in the LED security emitter, I felt a grim satisfaction. I flicked the switch inside the hall. Even in the daylight, the difference was noticeable. The frosted glass turned a stark, clinical white. It looked less like a home entrance and more like the intake door for a sanitarium. I turned it off. I would wait for nightfall. The rest of the day passed with agonizing slowness. I went to work, remote IT support, but my mind wasn't on resetting passwords. My mind was on the sun. I watched it track across the sky, urging it to dip below the horizon. At 7:45 p.m., the twilight settled over Oak Creek. The streetlights flickered on, casting their sickly orange sodium glow. I sat in my living room, watching the clock. 7:55 p.m., 7:58 p.m., 8 o'clock p.m. Reading hour. I stood up. "Buster," I said, "it's time to secure the perimeter." I walked to the front hall and flipped the switch. Click. I opened the front door and stepped out. It was glorious. The soft white glow was gone. In its place was a cone of pure, unadulterated visibility. The light was ice cold. It hit the concrete of my porch and bounced, illuminating the siding of my house with a harsh, blue-white clarity. Every flaw in the paint, every spiderweb in the corner, every grain of pollen was visible in high definition. But the best part? The spillover. Because the light was so much cleaner, read harsher, it didn't just glow, it cut. It sliced through the darkness. And sure enough, a significant portion of that cold white slice was angled directly over the cedar fence. I walked to the edge of the porch and peered over. Brenda's living room bay window was about 20 feet away. Usually, at this hour, I could see the warm yellow glow of her reading lamp. Now, however, the side of her house looked like it was being scanned by a police helicopter. The light hit her window, and even through the sheer curtains, I could see the distinct blue-white rectangle projected onto her wall. I waited. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes. Then the silhouette appeared. Brenda moved to the window. She parted the curtains. She wasn't holding her book. She was squinting. She held a hand up to shield her eyes, looking directly at my porch. I raised my coffee mug, now filled with whiskey, in a silent toast. "You wanted me to fix the ambiance, Brenda. I fixed it. I removed all the yellow. It's very safe now." The curtains snapped shut. I chuckled and sat down on my porch swing. The light was actually terrible. It made my skin look gray, and it attracted moths instantly, big, frantic ones that slammed into the glass with audible thuds. But it was worth it. I was just contemplating going inside to watch the game when I saw the flashing lights. Blue and red. Silent approach. A cruiser rolled slowly down the street and pulled up to the curb right in front of my house. My stomach dropped. She hadn't called the HOA. She hadn't called Janet. She had called the police. The car door opened, and Officer Miller stepped out. I knew Miller. He was a good guy, coached Little League with my brother-in-law. He looked tired. He adjusted his belt, looked up at my porch, and squinted aggressively, shielding his eyes with his hand. "Dave," he called out, his voice sounding weary. "Evening, officer," I said, staying seated. "Is there a problem?" "Well," Miller said, walking up the driveway, his boots crunching on the pavement. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, refusing to come up into the cone of interrogation light. "We got a call about a civil disturbance." "A disturbance?" I asked. "I'm just sitting here drinking tea, Miller." "The caller," Miller checked his notepad, though he definitely didn't need to, "alleged that you have erected a, quote, spite beacon intended to harass her." "It's a light bulb, Miller. It's from the hardware store. It's rated for residential use." Miller looked at the light, then looked at Brenda's house, then looked back at me. He sighed. "Dave, it's really bright. It looks like you're running a dental clinic on your porch." "It's for safety," I said. "Brenda pointed out earlier today that crime is a concern. I took her advice to heart. I upgraded my security profile." Miller rubbed his temples. "Dave, come on. Can you just put the old one back in? I have real calls to take. There's a teenager throwing eggs at mailboxes on Elm." "I can't," I said. "I threw the old one away. It was defective. This is all I have." Miller looked at me for a long moment. He knew I was lying. I knew he knew I was lying. But he also knew the law. "Is it motion activated?" Miller asked. I paused. "No, it's just a switch." "Well," Miller said, hitching up his belt. "There's no law against a bright porch light, Dave, as long as it's not directed traffic control or flashing. But do me a favor, maybe angle it down, or get a shade." "I'll look into it," I promised. Miller turned to leave, then stopped. "You know she's just going to escalate, right? Brenda isn't the type to fold." "I know," I said. "I'm counting on it." Miller shook his head, got back in his cruiser, and drove off. I sat there for another 10 minutes, basking in the 5,000 Kelvin glory. Miller was right. She would escalate. The sticky note was a warning shot. The police call was a skirmish. But as I looked at the dark corners of my yard, the shadows where the single bulb couldn't reach, I had an epiphany. Brenda had complained about the porch light. That was the specific grievance. If I kept the porch light, she would keep winning on technicalities about ambiance. But Miller had asked if it was motion activated. I looked at the pitch-black corners of my house. The eaves, the driveway, the side alley. Safety. If I wanted to be truly safe, and if I wanted to ensure Brenda never, ever complained about a single 60-watt bulb again, I needed to think bigger. I didn't need a bulb. I needed a system. I pulled out my phone and opened the browser. I typed in industrial flood lighten the first. Result was a 10,000 lumen stadium-grade LED motion sensor unit. The description read, "Suitable for parking lots, prisons, and aircraft hangars." I smiled. "Add to cart," I whispered. I took a sip of whiskey. The war had officially begun. The ceasefire lasted exactly 12 hours. I awoke the next morning feeling oddly refreshed, the kind of invigoration that comes from knowing your front porch is currently the brightest object in the northern hemisphere. I made coffee, whistled a little tune, and opened my laptop to check my email. There it was, time-stamped 6:02 a.m. Subject: Notice of Violation, 742 Evergreen Terrace, Urgent, from Oak Creek HOA Compliance Committee, no reply at oakcreekhoa.com. I didn't even sip my coffee. I clicked it open. Dear homeowner, it has been brought to our attention that an unauthorized lighting modification has been made to your property. Several complaints have been filed regarding excessive luminescence and light trespass occurring between the hours of 8:00 p.m. and 6:00 a.m. Per Article 4, Section C of the Oak Creek Covenants. Exterior lighting must be decorative in nature, soft in tone, under 3000 Kelvin, and shall not interfere with the quiet enjoyment of neighboring properties. You are hereby ordered to remove the offending fixture immediately. Failure to comply within 24 hours will result in a daily fine of $50 Sincerely, Janet W. HOA Chair. Janet. Of course, Brenda went to Janet. They probably drafted this email together over bran muffins and the misery of others. I sat back, staring at the screen. $50 a day. That was the cost of a nice steak dinner. Or, conversely, the cost of my dignity. Most people would have folded. Most people would have gone to the store, bought a generic 40-watt amber bulb, and lived the rest of their lives in the sepia-toned submission of defeat. But I am not most people. I am a man with a router, a rudimentary understanding of contract law, and a burning desire to not let Brenda win. I opened the HOA bylaws PDF, which I had saved on my desktop in a folder named Enemy Intel. I F for lighting. I read Article 4, Section C. It was there, just as Janet said. Decorative in nature, soft in tone. But then I scrolled down. Rules are like Swiss cheese. You just have to find the holes. And there, buried in Article 4, Section F, Emergency and Security Protocols, was the hole. The restrictions in Section C shall not apply to temporary emergency lighting or dedicated security systems. Motion-activated security lighting is permitted for the safety of the resident and property, provided the fixtures are mounted at least 8 feet high. I leaned back, a slow grin spreading across my face. Security systems, I said aloud. The bylaws didn't specify a maximum wattage for security systems. They didn't specify a color temperature. They didn't say anything about ambiance. They just said safety. If Brenda wanted to play by the book, we would play by the book. But she was reading the abridged version, and I was about to throw the whole encyclopedia at her. I chugged the rest of my coffee, grabbed my keys, and headed to the Home Depot. The Home Depot on a Wednesday morning is a liminal space. It is populated by contractors who smell like drywall dust and cigarettes, and retired men wandering the aisles looking for a specific screw that hasn't been manufactured since 1974. I bypassed the decorative lighting aisle, the land of soft lamps and Edison bulbs. I went straight to the back, to the industrial aisle, the aisle where the shelves are metal and the boxes don't have pictures of smiling families on them. I was standing in front of the floodlights, staring at a wall of gray boxes, when a voice cracked behind me. "Can I help you find something?" I turned. It was an employee. His apron was 3 sizes too big, and his name tag read Kyle. Kyle looked like he was about 19 and ran entirely on energy drinks and apathy. "Yes, Kyle," I said. "I have a question about lumens." Kyle blinked. "Okay." "I see this motion-activated light here," I said, pointing to a standard two-head fixture. "It says 2,000 lumens. Is that bright?" "Yeah, it's pretty bright," Kyle shrugged. "Good for a driveway?" "Okay. What if I want to see the future?" Kyle frowned. "What?" "I have a security concern," I said, adopting a serious, concerned citizen tone. "There is activity in my neighborhood. I need to illuminate my perimeter. I don't want to just see the intruder, Kyle. I want the intruder to question their life choices. I want them to think they have been abducted by aliens." Kyle scratched his neck. Okay. Well, we have this one. It's the Night Blaster 3000. It's LED. 5,000 lumens. 5,000, I mused. That's cute. But do you have anything that requires a warning label? Maybe something that could legally be classified as a weapon? Kyle's eyes lit up slightly. He realized I wasn't looking for a light. I was looking for power. He led me further down the aisle to the bottom shelf, where the boxes were heavy and covered in dust. "This is the Commercial Pro Series," Kyle said, tapping a box with his foot. "It's meant for warehouse parking lots. 12,000 lumens per head. It's hardwired. You can't just plug this in. It draws serious amps." I looked at the box. It didn't have a picture of a house. It had a picture of a shipping container yard. The text on the side promised daylight simulation and 180-degree motion detection. 12,000 lumens, I whispered. It was beautiful. "Yeah," Kyle said. "My uncle put one of these up at his farm to scare off coyotes. He said he saw a raccoon get a tan." "I'll take 4, I said. Kyle paused. 4? For a house?" "I have a very large concern," I said. "Dude," Kyle said, a mixture of respect and horror in his voice. "You're gonna need heavy-gauge wire, and probably a new breaker." "Load me up, Kyle." I spent the next hour filling a flatbed cart. I bought 4 of the Commercial Pro Series floodlights. I bought rolls of 12-2 Romex wire. I bought junction boxes, conduit straps, and a bag of wire nuts the size of popcorn kernels. As I pushed the cart toward the checkout, the wheels groaning under the weight of my vindication, I did the math in my head. My security emitter bulb was 1,600 lumens. Brenda had called the cops on that. I now had 48,000 lumens sitting in my cart. I was about to increase the brightness of my property by a factor of 30. The cashier scanned the boxes with a beep, beep, beep. "Doing some work?" she asked, eyeing the mountain of industrial electronics. "Just a little home improvement," I said. "Safety first." I paid, loaded the truck, and drove home. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked over at Brenda's house. She was in her garden again, wearing a visor, inspecting her hydrangeas. She didn't look up. She had no idea that a supernova was currently sitting in the bed of my pickup truck. She thought she had won with her email. She thought the $50 fine would break me. I carried the first box into the garage. It was heavy. It felt like justice. I am a man who knows his limits. I can change a tire. I can plunge a toilet. I can assemble IKEA furniture without crying, mostly. But staring at the back of the Commercial Pro Series floodlight, looking at the bundle of thick wires that looked less like electrical components and more like copper snakes, I realized I was out of my depth. Kyle the Depot Kid had mentioned voltage drop and dedicated circuits. I knew just enough about electricity to know that it is invisible angry, and kills you if you touch it wrong. If I tried to wire 48,000 lumens into my existing porch light circuit, I wouldn't just trip a breaker, I would probably melt the siding off my house. I needed a professional. But I couldn't hire a real professional. A real electrician from a reputable company would show up in a clean van with a logo. They would look at my plan. They would ask questions like, "Why do you need stadium lighting for a quarter-acre lot?" And, "Have you considered therapy?" And, "I can't legally install this without a permit that takes 6 weeks." I didn't have 6 weeks. I had 24 hours before Janet started fining me. I needed a freelancer, a mercenary of the mains. I went to Craigslist. I went to the services section. I typed in electrician. I skipped the ads with polished logos and licensed bond numbers. I looked for the guys who typed in all caps and used blurry photos of fuse boxes. I found him on the 3rd page. Rick the Sparky. I do wires. No job 2. Small. Cash preferred. Call me. There was no last name. There was no license number. The profile picture was just a thumb partially covering a lens. I called Rick. "Hello?" The voice sounded like it had been gargling gravel and cigarette smoke. "Hi, is this Rick?" "Depends who's asking. You the IRS?" "No, I'm a homeowner with a cash job. I need some external security lighting installed. Today." "Today?" Rick paused. I heard the distinct phwee of a vape pen. I'm supposed to be fixing a ceiling fan for a lady in West Side, but she's got cats. I hate cats. What kind of lighting we talking? "Floodlights," I said. "Big ones. 4 corners, hardwired." "I can be there in 20. Rick arrived in 22 minutes. His vehicle was a white Ford Econoline van from the mid-90s that had clearly seen some things. It had rust around the wheel wells and a bumper sticker that read, "Electricians do it with more resistance." Rick hopped out. He was a wire of a man, skinny, twitchy, wearing cargo shorts with approximately 40 pockets, a tool belt that looked like it weighed more than he did, and a t-shirt that said Metallica, but was faded to gray. He had a pencil behind one ear and a voltage tester behind the other. "You Dave?" he asked, squinting at my house. "I'm Dave." "Nice place," Rick said, spitting on my driveway. "HOA?" "Yes," Rick grimaced. "Hate HOAs. Fascists with clipboards. Show me the gear." I led him into the garage. I pointed to the stack of Commercial Pro Series boxes. Rick whistled. It was a low, appreciative sound. He walked over and patted the top box. "Whoa," he said. "The Pro Series. These are the halogen killers. You expecting a siege?" "Neighbor dispute," I said simply. Rick looked at me. A grin split his face, revealing a slightly chipped front tooth. "Say no more, brother. I live for this stuff. One time I wired a guy's doorbell to a foghorn because his ex-wife kept coming over. Let's walk the property." We walked out to the front lawn. Rick took a tape measure out of a pocket and started snapping it around like a whip. "Okay," I said, pointing to the corners of the house. "Here's the vision. I want total coverage, 360 degrees. If a moth farts in the driveway, I want to see its ancestors." Rick nodded, scribbling on a dirty notepad. "Right. Total saturation. We put 1 unit here, facing the street. That cuts off the approach. We put 1 on the back corner for the yard." He walked to the side of the house, the side facing Brenda. "Now," I said, lowering my voice. "This is the critical zone. The neighbor on this side, she has sensitive eyes." Rick looked at the fence, then at Brenda's bay window, then back at the mounting point. He did some mental geometry. "If we mount the unit here," Rick said, pointing to the eaves, "about 12 feet up, and angle the heads at 45 degrees, the spread is going to catch that window. It's going to be aggressive, Dave. We're talking X-ray vision." "Is it illegal?" I asked. "Illegal?" Rick scoffed. "Building code says I gotta ground it, and I can't leave exposed wires. It don't say nothing about hurting feelings. As long as the fixture is on your property, you're golden. Are these motion sensors?" "Yes." "Beautiful," Rick said. "We'll wire them into a dedicated 20-amp circuit. I'll pull a new line from the panel. If we put them on the existing circuit, you'll pop the breaker every time a raccoon walks by. You want these independent. You want power. Can we get it done today?" Rick checked the sun. "It's 11 o'clock a.m. I got Red Bull in the van. I got a hammer drill. I can have this live by sunset. It'll cost you $800 for labor, plus parts." "Deal," I said. Rick extended a callous, greasy hand. I shook it. It felt like shaking a bag of wrenches. "Operation Supernova is a go," Rick said. The next 6 hours were a symphony of destruction. Rick didn't work. He attacked the house. He set up a ladder that looked dangerously unstable. He drilled holes through my siding with a violence that made me wince. He crawled into my attic, dragging coils of yellow Romex wire like a spelunker going into a cave system. From the attic, I could hear him singing along to classic rock, occasionally shouting things like, "Oh yeah, that's a tight squeeze," and "Who grounded this? An idiot?" I stayed on the ground, acting as the lookout. Around 2:00 p.m., Brenda came out. She had heard the drilling. She walked to the fence line, looking suspicious. She saw Rick on the ladder, currently mounting a gray metal box the size of a toaster to the corner of my roof. "Excuse me," she called up. Rick looked down. He was holding a screwdriver in his mouth like a cigar. He took it out. "Yo." "What are you doing?" Brenda demanded. "Construction work requires an Architectural Review Committee approval form." Rick looked at me. I gave him a subtle nod. "Handle it." "Emergency maintenance, ma'am," Rick yelled down. "Electrical fault. Dangerous stuff. Electrons leaking everywhere. Had to secure the perimeter before the whole block goes up." Brenda frowned. "Electrons leaking? That's not a thing." "Oh, it's a thing," Rick lied smoothly. "It's called voltage seepage. Very serious. Causes dry skin and bad Wi-Fi. We're installing voltage regulation modules." He pointed to the massive floodlight head. Brenda squinted at it. "That looks like a light." "It's a sensor," Rick said. "For the seepage. Highly technical. You might want to stand back, ma'am. I'm about to energize the flux capacitor." Brenda huffed. "I'm watching you," she said, and stormed back inside. Rick laughed, a sound like a car engine trying to turn over in winter. "She's a charmer. Voltage seepage. Can't believe she bought that." "She didn't," I said. "She's going to call Janet. We need to hurry." By 5:00 p.m., the sun was beginning its descent. Rick was covered in drywall dust, sweat, and attic insulation. He looked like a powdered donut that had been dropped in a barber shop. "All right, boss," Rick said, wiping his hands on his shorts. "We are wired. We are sealed. We are code compliant, mostly." He led me to the garage. He had installed a new sub-panel box right next to my main breaker. It was industrial gray. "I gave you a separate switch," Rick explained. "This is the master override. Up is on, down is off. But the beauty is the sensors. I set 'em to test mode right now so we can aim 'em. You ready?" "I was born ready," I said. Rick flipped the switch. Thwack! The sound of the heavy-duty relays closing was audible. It sounded like a prison gate slamming shut. Outside, the world changed. Even though it was late afternoon and the sun was still up, the sudden injection of 48,000 lumens created a weird visual distortion. The shadows under the eaves vanished instantly. The concrete driveway didn't just look bright, it looked bleached. We walked outside to the side of the house. The unit facing Brenda's house was humming. A low 60-cycle hum of pure power. The two heads were angled down, but down is a relative term when you are dealing with this much scatter. The light was bouncing off the grass, off the fence, and creating a massive diffuse glow that bathed the side of Brenda's house in clinical white light. "It's aggressive," Rick admitted, looking at his handiwork. "I like it." "It's perfect," I said. "Now," Rick said, climbing up the ladder one last time. "Let's dial in the sensors. You want them sensitive?" I thought about the sticky note. "Your porch light is aggressive." "Rick," I said, "if a squirrel runs across the fence, I want to know." "High sensitivity it is," Rick said, twisting the little dial on the bottom of the sensor. "I'm setting the duration to 5 minutes. That means once it triggers, it stays on for 5 minutes. Plenty of time to identify the threat." "Or the neighbor," I added. Rick climbed down and packed up his tools. I handed him an envelope with $800 cash, plus a $50 tip. "You're a good man, Dave," Rick said, counting the bills. "If you ever need to electrify the fence, you have my number." "I hope it doesn't come to that," I said. Rick hopped into his van. "It always comes to that," he shouted over the engine noise. He peeled out of the driveway, leaving a small cloud of exhaust. I stood alone in the driveway. The sun was setting. The sky was turning a beautiful shade of violet. Inside the house, the email from Janet was still waiting, decorative in nature. I looked up at the 4 gray sentinels mounted to the corners of my home. They looked like gargoyles of the modern age. "Decorative," I muttered. "They decorate the house with safety." I went inside, grabbed a beer, and sat by the window. I checked my watch. 7:58 p.m. 2 minutes to showtime. I waited for the first motion. I waited for the first photon war of Oak Creek to begin. I didn't have to wait long. A stray cat was making its way down the sidewalk. God bless that cat. While I waited for the cat to cross the Rubicon, or in this case, the cracked pavement of my driveway, I took a moment to mentally review my legal defense. In any war, logistics are important, but propaganda and legal standing are what win the peace. Weapon was the Oak Creek Homeowners Association Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, CCNRs. I had the PDF open on my phone, glowing softly in the twilight. I knew Janet and Brenda were relying on Article 4, Section C. Exterior lighting must be decorative in nature. It was a strong clause. It was designed to keep people from putting up neon beer signs or those inflatable Santa Clauses that look like they're suffocating when the fan dies. But I had found the Holy Grail in Section F. Section F was the panic button of the bylaws. It was written in 1998, back when the neighborhood was first built, and there was a brief, hysterical fear of urban youths skateboarding in the cul-de-sacs. The bylaws had been written to allow frightened residents to turn their homes into fortresses, provided they used the word security. Subsection F2. In the interest of community safety, motion-activated illumination devices are permitted for the deterrence of trespassing, vandalism, and wildlife. Such devices are exempt from the luminescence caps of Section C, provided they are not permanently engaged. Exempt. It was the most beautiful word in the English language. Brenda could complain about ambiance all she wanted. Ambiance is a feeling. Exempt is a statute. I took a sip of my beer. The air was cooling down. The crickets were starting their evening chorus, unaware that they were about to be exposed to enough radiation to potentially mutate their grandchildren. I looked at the cat. It was a tabby, a raggedy little thing that belonged to the Johnsons 3 doors down. It was creeping along the edge of my lawn, stalking a moth. It moved with the silent grace of a predator. It placed one paw on the concrete of my driveway. The motion sensor on the garage corner, a white plastic dome that looked like the eye of a Sentinel robot, blinked red once. It was calculating. It was thinking. Is this a threat? Rick had set the sensitivity to high. In Rick's world, high meant paranoid schizophrenic. The sensor decided. Threat detected. Click. There is a sound that high-voltage electronics make when they engage. It's not just a click. It's a thrum. It's the sound of the power grid groaning under sudden demand. The world turned white. I don't mean it got bright. I mean the concept of night ceased to exist within a 50-foot radius of my garage. The 4 commercial Pro Series heads, boasting a combined output of 48,000 lumens, ignited simultaneously. For a split second, my vision went blank. It was like a flashbang grenade had gone off in my lap. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the light was so intense I could see the veins in my eyelids. When I opened them, squinting against the glare, I saw the cat. The cat was no longer a predator. It was a deer in the headlights of a freight train. It had frozen mid-step, its pupils constricted to microscopic pinpricks. The light was so powerful that I couldn't just see the cat. I could see the individual hairs on its tail. I could see the flea jumping off its back. I could practically see its soul leaving its body. The cat didn't run. It levitated. It performed a vertical leap that defied physics, hissing at the invisible demon that had just turned the sun back on, and scrambled up the oak tree in the front yard at Mach speeds. "System functional," I whispered, blinking away the spots in my vision. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch to inspect the coverage. Rick, God bless him, was an artist. The coverage was absolute. There were no shadows. The driveway was a sheet of white. The lawn was a stark, green lunar landscape. The gnome I had placed by the mailbox looked terrified. But the real triumph was the spill. I turned to look at the fence line. The photons weren't respecting the property boundary. Photons, as I recalled from high school physics, travel in straight lines until they hit something. And these photons were hitting Brenda's house. The side of her home, which had previously been a tasteful, shadowed gray, was now illuminated with the intensity of a prison yard during a breakout. The light blasted through the gaps in the cedar fence, creating razor-sharp stripes of brilliance on her siding. It washed over her bay window. It was glorious. It was petty. It was technically legal. I checked the time. 8:03 p.m. The light stayed on. Rick had set the timer for 5 minutes. 8:04 p.m. The neighborhood was silent, save for the low electrical hum of the fixtures. They were actually generating heat. I could feel the warmth radiating from the nearest one. I waited. I knew the reaction wouldn't be immediate. Brenda would be in shock. She would be sitting in her armchair, trying to understand why a UFO had just landed next door. She would be checking her glasses. Then, she would be checking the window. At 8:05 p.m., the lights finally clicked off. The sudden return to darkness was jarring. My eyes struggled to adjust. The purple afterimage of the LED arrays floated in my vision like ghosts. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now, I just needed the prey to move. I sat back down on the swing. "Here we go," I said to Buster, who was hiding under the porch furniture, wisely afraid of the skyfire. And then the back door of the house next door opened. The door didn't just open. It flew open. Brenda marched out onto her back patio. Even in the dark, I could sense the vibration of her fury. She was wearing a floral house dress and clutching a phone in one hand. She was marching toward the fence line, ready to unleash a torrent of HOA citations. "David!" she shrieked. "David, what in God's name was—" She crossed the invisible tripwire of the backyard sensor. Click, hum. The second bank of lights, the ones Rick had mounted on the rear corner of my house, detonated. Because Brenda was in her backyard, and my lights were angled to protect the perimeter, she was hit directly in the face with 24,000 lumens of cool white justice. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of terror, exactly. It was the scream of a vampire exposed to the dawn. She threw her hands up to cover her face, staggering back a step. The light was merciless. It illuminated her floral dress with such clarity that I could identify the species of hibiscus printed on the fabric. It cast a 50-foot shadow of her figure against her own house, a looming giantess of suburbia. "My eyes!" she yelled, shielding her face. "I'm blind! David!" "Safety first, Brenda," I shouted back, sipping my beer. I was wearing sunglasses now. I had prepared. "Turn it off!" she bellowed, still shielding her eyes, trying to locate me in the glare. She looked like she was caught in a spotlight on a Broadway stage, waiting for the audience to applaud. "This is insanity! It's like the surface of the sun out here!" "It's motion activated," I called out, my voice dripping with helpfulness. "It detects threats. You must have triggered the perimeter." "I am not a threat," she screamed. "I am your neighbor!" "The sensor doesn't know that, Brenda. It just sees movement. It's an impartial guardian." "It's burning my retinas." She tried to back up toward her door, but she was stumbling because her depth perception had been obliterated by the wall of white light. "Just stand still," I advised. "If you stop moving, it'll turn off in 5 minutes." 5 minutes? Rick set it to maximum security mode. We can't be too careful. I saw a possum earlier. Brenda managed to find her door handle. She threw the door open and scrambled inside, slamming it shut behind her. The lights remained on. I sat on my porch, bathed in the scatter from the backyard array, and waited. The timer ticked down. 4 minutes. 3 minutes. The light attracted a swarm of June bugs, which dive-bombed the fixture with audible pings. Finally, the lights clicked off. Darkness returned. I waited for the police. I knew they were coming. Brenda wasn't the type to suffer in silence. She was currently on the phone with dispatch, probably describing a terroristic blinding event. Sure enough, 12 minutes later, the blue and red strobe washed over the street. It was Officer Miller again. He didn't pull up to the curb this time. He pulled into my driveway, right up to the garage door. He sat in his car for a moment, likely contemplating his life choices and the pension he was still 10 years away from collecting. He got out. He was wearing his hat. He walked up the driveway. He took 3 steps. Click. The front array engaged. Officer Miller stopped. He didn't scream. He didn't flinch. He just sighed, a long, heavy exhale that was visible in the cold, white air. He looked down at his own shadow, which was burned into the asphalt with razor-sharp edges. He looked up at the light source, squinting. "Dave," he said. He didn't even shout. He just spoke into the cone of light. "I'm on the porch, officer," I called out. Miller walked up the steps, keeping his head down to avoid the glare. He reached the porch, which was slightly shadowed because the lights were mounted above us, firing outward. He took off his hat and wiped his forehead. "Dave," Miller said again. "What did you do?" "I upgraded," I said. "You told me the other light wasn't motion-activated. You implied that a security system would be more appropriate. I took your advice." Miller turned and looked at the street. The lights were so powerful they were illuminating the house across the street. I could see my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, peeking through his blinds. "This isn't a security system," Miller said. "This is an airstrip. I could land a Cessna in your driveway, Dave." "Is it illegal?" I asked. The magic question. Miller hesitated. He pulled out a small notebook. "Technically? No. It's on your property. It's not directed at oncoming traffic, though it's close. It's not a laser." "Then I'm good," I said. "Dave, Mrs. Higgins next door called 911, not the non-emergency line. 911. She said you were, and I quote, attempting to X-ray her house." "She's prone to hyperbole," I said. "It's for safety. Look at how safe we are right now, Miller. Do you see any burglars?" "No, because they are currently melting." Miller chuckled, despite himself. "It is bright. I'll give you that." "It's 48,000 lumens of peace of mind," I said. Miller looked at the fixture again. "Is it going to stay on all night?" "Only if there's motion," I said. "If everyone just stays in their homes and remains perfectly still, it'll be pitch black." Miller shook his head. "You know you're starting a war, right? This isn't just a bulb anymore. This is aggressive." "She started it," I said, sounding like a 5-year-old. "She left a note." "Right. The note." Miller put his hat back on. "Look, I can't cite you. Yet. But if this thing flashes on and off all night, she's going to get you on a nuisance ordinance. Intermittent strobing is a violation." "It won't strobe," I promised, "unless there's a lot of activity." Miller turned to leave. He walked back down the driveway. As he reached his car, the 5-minute timer ran out. Click. Darkness. Miller paused, his hand on the car door. He looked back at the house, now invisible in the gloom. "Have a good night, Dave," he called out. "Stay safe, officer," I replied. He drove away. I thought I had won. I thought the sheer firepower of the Commercial Pro series would force Brenda into submission. I thought she would buy blackout curtains and admit defeat. I was wrong. At 9:30 p.m., the wind picked up. It was a gentle breeze, typical for this time of year. It rustled the oak trees. It swayed the hanging flower baskets on my porch. It also moved the branches of the large maple tree that sat near the property line. Click, hum. The backyard lights roared to life. I groaned. Rick had set the sensitivity too high. The moving branches were registering as a threat. I waited 5 minutes. The lights clicked off. 10 seconds later, the wind blew again. The branches waved. Click, hum. The backyard lit up again. I sat up. This was a problem. If the lights turned on and off every 5 minutes, Miller was right. It would be a strobe effect. It would be a nuisance. Brenda would have legal standing. I needed to adjust the sensitivity. I needed to go get the ladder. But before I could stand up, I heard a sound from next door. Screech! It was the sound of a window opening. "It's blinking!" Brenda shouted from her bedroom window. "It's blinking on and off! I'm recording this, David! I'm taking a video! This is harassment!" "It's the wind!" I yelled back. "I'll fix it!" "Don't bother," she yelled. "I'm calling the bylaws committee. You're in violation of the nuisance clause. Enjoy your fine." The window slammed shut. I sat there, the lights humming above me. The wind blew. The leaves danced. The sensor watched them, unblinking, interpreting the leaves as a gang of tiny burglars. I realized then that Rick the Sparky had been too effective. He had built a system that was too perfect. I went to the garage to find the ladder. I had to lower the sensitivity. I had to dial it back. But as I reached for the ladder, I stopped. If I lowered the sensitivity, Brenda won. If I lowered the sensitivity, I was admitting that the lights were too much. I was admitting that she dictated the terms of my lighting. I looked at the sensor dial. It was currently set to max. There was another setting, one that Rick hadn't mentioned. It wasn't a sensitivity setting. It was a mode setting. Dusk to dawn. Dusk to dawn mode didn't rely on motion. It just stayed on. All night, continuous, unbroken. If the light never turned off, it wasn't blinking. If it wasn't blinking, it wasn't a strobe. If it wasn't a strobe, it wasn't a nuisance under the specific flashing lights ordinance Miller had mentioned. It would just be a security light. A very, very bright security light. I looked at Brenda's dark window. I thought about the sticky note. I thought about the ambiance. I reached up and flipped the switch on the sensor to dusk to dawn. The lights didn't click off this time. They just hummed. A steady, unwavering, eternal hum. I walked back to the porch. My house was now a lighthouse. It was a beacon of stubbornness visible from space. "Your move, Brenda," I whispered. The war had barely begun. Here are the final 3 sections of the story. The problem with creating a miniature star in a residential neighborhood is not the light itself. It is the ecosystem that the light invites. I ran the system on dusk to dawn mode for exactly 3 nights. Those were 3 nights of glorious, uncompromising visibility. I slept like a baby, knowing that my property was bathed in a protective shell of photons so dense that a neutrino would struggle to pass through it. But there were side effects. The first was the electric meter. I went out to check it on the second day. The little metal wheel inside the glass housing wasn't just spinning, it was blurring. It looked like a table saw blade. I did some quick mental math and realized that if I kept the Oak Creek supernova running continuously for a month, my electric bill would rival the GDP of a small Caribbean nation. The second side effect was the biology. Nature, unfortunately, loves a vacuum, but it loves a 48,000 lumen light source even more. By the 3rd night, my house had become Mecca for every insect in the tri-state area. I'm not talking about a few moths. I'm talking about a biblical plague. June bugs, moths the size of sparrows, beetles with hard shells that sounded like gunfire when they hit the aluminum housing of the floodlights. The air around my house was a swirling vortex of wings and dust. It looked like a snow globe, if the snow was made of confused invertebrates. Brenda, naturally, noticed the ecosystem collapse before I did. I was in the driveway, sweeping up a pile of dead moths that was disturbingly deep, when she appeared at the fence. She was wearing sunglasses. At 10:03 a.m. "David," she said, her voice tight. "We need to talk about the fauna." "The fauna?" I asked, leaning on my broom. "There is a bat colony circling your chimney," she said, pointing up. "They are feeding on the swarm. My cat is having a nervous breakdown watching them. And I found a beetle in my tea this morning. A beetle, David. It was roasted." "It's the circle of life, Brenda," I said philosophically. "The light brings the bugs bring the bats eat the bugs. It's nature. You like gardening. You should appreciate the biodiversity." "I appreciate sleep," she snapped. I have put tin foil on my bedroom windows. Tin foil! I look like I'm running a meth lab, David. And the buzzing. The sound of those lights is louder than my refrigerator. She had a point about the buzzing. The drivers in the Commercial Pro Series fixtures were industrial grade. They didn't hum. They groaned. It sounded like the house was meditating aggressively. And, she added, playing her ace card, Janet sent another email. The dusk to dawn setting violates the energy conservation clause of the bylaws. Article 9. You are wasting community resources. I gritted my teeth. Janet again. Fine, I said. I'll adjust it. I'll turn off the continuous mode. I'll go back to motion activation. Brenda let out a breath of relief. Thank you. Just normal motion, like a normal person. Normal, I agreed. Safety first. I went inside and grabbed the ladder. I couldn't afford the electricity of constant lighting, but I couldn't let Brenda win. If I went back to standard motion activation, she would just learn to walk softly. She would learn to sneak. I needed the system to be vigilant. I needed it to be hyper-aware. I climbed up to the sensors. Rick the Sparky had left the dials set to high sensitivity. But looking closely, I saw that the dial actually went past high. There was a little red zone at the end of the rotation labeled simply Test Max. Usually, Test mode is just for checking the wiring. It makes the light trigger on anything and turn off after 5 seconds. But what if I left it there? If I set it to max sensitivity with a short duration, the lights wouldn't just stay on. They would react. They would be dynamic. They would be alive. I twisted the dials on all 4 units to the absolute limit. I aimed the sensors slightly upward, catching not just the ground, but the air. System recalibrated, I whispered. That night, the wind picked up. At 9:00 p.m., a gust of air moved through the neighborhood. It shook the leaves of the oak tree. Click flash. The lights blasted on for 10 seconds, illuminating the street in stark white relief, then vanished into darkness. Click off. 3 seconds later, a moth flew past the sensor. Click flash. 10 seconds of blinding white. Click off. Then the wind blew harder. The tree branches swayed rhythmically. Click flash. Click off, click flash. Click off. It wasn't a security light anymore. It was a strobe light. It was a chaotic 48,000 lumen disco ball powered by atmospheric pressure and insect wings. I sat in my living room, watching the reflection on my television screen. The room would plunge into darkness. Then, zap. Everything would be bleached white, then darkness again. It was like living inside a rave hosted by an erratic deity. My phone buzzed. It was the neighborhood Facebook group, Oak Creek Community Watch. Susan. Is there a thunderstorm? Why is the sky flashing? Mark Teo. I think a transformer blew up. Kevin L. No, it's Dave. It's definitely Dave. Brenda, admin. It is David. He has turned his house into a strobe light. I am currently having a seizure. At David, stop this immediately. I typed a reply. Just calibrating the sensors. Safety requires precision. It's detecting atmospheric threats. I posted it. A moment later, I saw the blue and red lights reflecting off my ceiling. Officer Miller was back. I walked out to the porch. The lights were currently off. Miller was standing in the driveway, looking up at the dark fixtures. Don't move, I warned him. Dave, Miller said. He took a step. Click flash. The world exploded into white. Miller flinched, covering his eyes. Jesus, Dave, Miller yelled over the hum. It's like a paparazzi ambush. It's the sensitivity, I yelled back. I'm trying to save electricity, Miller. It only comes on when needed. The lights clicked off. Darkness. Miller stood in the dark, rubbing his eyes. Dave, you're signaling aircraft. I got a call from the county sheriff. A pilot reported a patterned anomaly in Sector 4. That's you. You are the anomaly. It's effective, isn't it? It's psychological warfare, Miller said. Brenda is crying. She says she feels like she's in a Cold War interrogation. She wanted motion activated, I argued. This is motion activated. It's detecting the motion of the wind. Fix it, Miller said, his voice stern. I can't cite you for a steady light, but I can cite you for creating a distraction to drivers. If a car crashes because you blinded them with a strobe light, you're liable. Turn down the sensitivity. I'll consider it, I said. Miller got back in his car. As he reversed, his tires kicked up a cloud of dust. Click flash. The lights saluted him one last time. I went back inside. I knew I had to dial it back. Miller was serious about the liability. But for tonight? For tonight, I let the house dance. A week passed. The Cold War had settled into a simmering détente. I had dialed the sensitivity back slightly, from paranoid schizophrenic to merely high anxiety. The lights no longer triggered on moths, but they still caught cats, raccoons, and large falling leaves. Brenda had stopped talking to me. She had started a petition. I saw her walking door to door with a clipboard, pointing at my house and shaking her head. She was gathering troops. She was building a coalition. The atmosphere in Oak Creek was tense. The summer heat was oppressive, hanging over the cul-de-sac like a wet wool blanket. The air conditioners were humming in unison, straining the grid. Then came Tuesday night. It started with a storm, a real midsummer thrasher. Thunder rolled across the valley, shaking the window panes. The wind whipped the trees into a frenzy. At 10:15 p.m., the sky opened up. Rain lashed against the siding. And then, with a sound like a giant snapping a dry twig, the power went out. Vrr. The hum of the air conditioners died. The streetlights, those comforting orange sodium globes, flickered and went black. The neighborhood was plunged into absolute, inky darkness. I sat in my living room, the silence pressing in. My TV was dead. My Wi-Fi was dead. But my security system was not. Rick the Sparky, in a moment of genius, or upsell, had convinced me to install a battery backup for the control panel. It wouldn't run the lights for long, but it would hold the charge for short bursts. I went to the window. It was pitch black outside. I couldn't see the street. I couldn't see Brenda's house. I couldn't even see my own hand in front of my face. It was the perfect cover. I heard voices. Low, hushed voices. Usually in Oak Creek, voices at night meant teenagers sneaking a cigarette. But these voices were different. They were urgent. And they were accompanied by the distinct clack of a car door handle being tried. I moved to the window. I peered through the blinds. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the street. In that split second, I saw them. 3 figures. Hoodies up. Dark clothes. They were moving, methodically down the street, checking cars. They were confident. They knew the power was out. They knew the cameras were down. They knew the Ring doorbells were offline. They were moving toward my driveway. "Buster," I whispered to my dog, "it's showtime." I didn't need to do anything. I just needed to wait. The lead figure stepped onto my lawn. He was holding a flashlight, but he hadn't turned it on yet. He was creeping toward my truck. He took another step. He crossed the invisible line of the sensor. The battery backup kicked in. Click. It wasn't the full 48,000 lumens. The battery couldn't push that much amperage. It was maybe half power. But in the total, suffocating darkness of a blackout, 24,000 lumens is effectively a nuclear event. Wham! The light didn't just turn on. It punched the darkness in the throat. The effect was cinematic. The three burglars were instantly frozen in a cone of brilliant, stark white light. They looked like actors who had forgotten their lines. They were blinded, disoriented, and exposed. One of them dropped a crowbar. It clattered on my driveway with a sound that echoed through the silent neighborhood. "Gah!" one of them yelled, shielding his eyes. "What is that?" "I can't see," the other screamed. "It's everywhere!" They spun around, trying to run, but the light was omnipresent. They were spotlighted. And then, the neighborhood woke up. Brenda, who had likely been sitting in the dark, terrified, looked out her window. She saw the scene. She saw the three men in hoodies standing in the middle of a supernova on my driveway. She didn't call the HOA. She opened her window. "Hey!" Brenda screamed. Her voice was shrill and magnificent. "Get away from there! I see you! We all see you!" The burglars panicked. They couldn't see Brenda. They couldn't see anything but the white-hot wrath of my LEDs. They stumbled, tripping over each other, trying to escape the cone of visibility. "Run!" the leader yelled. They scrambled down the driveway, but as they hit the sidewalk, they triggered the street-facing sensor. Zap! Another bank of lights slammed on, chasing them down the road. They were running through a gauntlet of illumination. "Police!" Mr. Henderson yelled from across the street. He had come out onto his porch with a baseball bat. The burglars sprinted into the darkness of the park at the end of the block, their night vision ruined, leaving behind a crowbar and their dignity. My lights stayed on for another 3 minutes, casting a triumphant glow over the empty street. Then, the battery died. Click. Darkness returned. But the silence was different now. It wasn't fearful. It was the silence of a victory. "You're welcome," I said to the dark room. The power came back on an hour later. The police arrived shortly after that. Officer Miller was there, along with 2 other cruisers. They took the crowbar into evidence. They took statements. Mr. Henderson was shaking my hand. "Did you see that, Dave?" he kept saying. "You lit 'em up. They looked like deer. I've never seen anything like it. It was like the hand of God came down." "Just standard security, Bob," I said modestly. "Perimeter defense." Then I saw Brenda. She was standing by the fence. She was wearing her bathrobe. She looked tired. She looked at the police cars, then at the crowbar in the evidence bag, and finally at the gray metal fixtures on my house. I walked over to the fence. "Evening, Brenda," I said. She crossed her arms. She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "They were trying to break into my car," she said softly. "I saw them. They were heading for my Subaru." "They were," I nodded. "Nasty business." "The light," she started, then stopped. She took a deep breath. "The light stopped them." "It disoriented them," I corrected. "Tactical blindness." Brenda looked at the floodlight nearest to her window, the one that had tormented her for weeks, the one she had petitioned to remove. "It is still," she chose her words carefully, "hideously bright. It is an aesthetic crime, David. It is aggressive." "It is," I agreed. "But," she sighed, "it was effective." "I can adjust it," I said. Brenda blinked. "Excuse me?" "I can angle them down," I said. "And I can put blinders on the sides, so it doesn't hit your window. It'll just hit the driveway and the fence line. Rick showed me how." "You would do that?" "Sure," I said. I mean, the point was safety, right? We're safe now. The bad guys know this house is a lighthouse. They won't come back. Brenda pursed her lips. She looked at the light, then back at me. A truce was forming. It was fragile, born of adrenaline and shared trauma, but it was there. If you angle them down, she said, and lower the sensitivity so it doesn't trigger when a leaf falls, I will withdraw the petition. Deal, I said. And, she added, Janet wants to know where you got them. She wants to install some at the clubhouse. I laughed. I'll give you the number for Rick the Sparky, but tell her to pay cash. The next night was calm. I had spent the afternoon on the ladder. I angled the heads down sharply. I installed little metal shields on the sides to prevent the spillover. I turned the sensitivity dial from test wash max down to a reasonable medium. I sat on the porch with a beer. It was 9:00 p.m. The street was dark. The orange streetlights hummed. It was peaceful. Brenda's window was dark. No tin foil, just curtains. I took a sip of my drink. It was quiet. Too quiet, almost. Then a single firefly drifted into the yard. It blinked its tiny bioluminescent butt, floating lazily through the warm air. It drifted closer to the house. It flew right in front of the sensor. Click. The driveway was instantly bathed in a pool of crisp white light. It wasn't a supernova anymore. It was controlled. It was focused. But it was still bright enough to perform surgery on the pavement. I smiled, shielding my eyes slightly. Worth every penny, I whispered. I raised my glass to the sensor. The light clicked off. The firefly flew on, safe and sound. I stayed on the porch for a long time, watching the darkness, my hand resting near the switch, ready to summon the sun whenever I pleased.